Songs are interesting. Whether it's popular songs, whether it's worship songs, whether it's national songs, whatever it is, songs are interesting. I'm fascinated sometimes by the way that a song becomes popular or doesn't become popular or becomes popular after the fact. And right, if you look through our history, especially going back into the 50s, 60s, 70s, when we really started having music on the radio, songs had a weird life cycle. Some songs became instantly popular. Maybe the right label paid the right money to the right DJ at the right station, and it started getting played constantly, and then all the other radio stations picked it up. And suddenly it's that song that you can't change to a different channel without hearing it again in the next 5 minutes. Other songs were released and then only became popular 10, 15, 20 years later because some DJ at a radio station found it collecting dust, liked what they heard, and put it on the radio. And then there are some songs that seem to take on a life of their own. One of those songs is a song called You'll Never Walk Alone. In 1945, Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote the musical Carousel. And one of the songs that they wrote in it is this tune called You'll Never Walk Alone. It's a simple tune. And after the musical's release, it gained popularity, this song, almost instantly because of the message that it had. If you remember, right, 1945, we're at the end, coming out of World War II. We're at a time when we've been through a really dark period of our history and are looking for hope. And the song is filled with lines that talk about that. Things like, when you walk through a storm, hold your head up high. Don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm, there's a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on, with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. It's a song that became popular and was covered by a few different artists, some really well-known ones, and had this kind of life as a song. And in the 60s, a small Mersey beat-style band called Gary and the Pacemakers released a new cover of the song. Now, Mersey beat, right, it's this type of band that was made famous by the Beatles. The Beatles were from a town in England called Liverpool. And one of the other things that Liverpool has as kind of a claim to fame besides the Beatles is they have one of the most storied soccer teams in the history of the world in Liverpool FC. And so the 60s had this perfect storm where music was played before the match in the stadium, the team was doing well, and the song was doing well. And this song, You'll Never Walk Alone, was getting played in the stadium before matches. And eventually, it became this tradition. It became a part of Liverpool's history and tradition that before every match, the crowd would sing together, You'll Never Walk Alone. If you've never heard it before, if you've never heard tens of thousands of people in a soccer stadium sing this song, You'll Never Walk Alone, go on YouTube, you can find 1,000 clips of it. It's incredible. I remember in a few years back, I had the chance to go to England and go to a Liverpool game and be in the crowd as they sang You'll Never Walk Alone together. And I had goosebumps on my arms. You see, in the 60s, it started to become that tradition, and it became more and more. And as the team went through the normal ups and downs that all sports teams do, it became woven into the fabric and the identity of that team. In 1989, that song took on further significance. In 1989, a group of Liverpool fans went to an away match, and due to a large collaboration of errors between crowd control, overcrowding, poor stadium construction, poor crowd entry done, there was a panic and fans were crushed. And 96 fans who went to a soccer game didn't come back that day. And at the vigil for those fans, they sung You'll Never Walk Alone. The first time coming back together in a stadium, that song was sung. And it took on a new life of its own, right? That tradition became even deeper and more steeped, and it bonded that community together. And to this day, it's become this global community of fans of the soccer team with this song unifying them. That's been through the highest moments of some people's life as a soccer fan and the lowest moments of some people's life as a whole. And it's bonded them together in a way that I don't think few things do. And it's taken on, again, this life of its own. There's actually a German soccer team that sings You'll Never Walk Alone before their matches as well. I'd be willing to bet that the words You'll Never Walk Alone or even the initials are tattooed on more people's bodies than any other song. Why is this? Why does a song that was written for the musical carousel, why did it take on such a new life of its own? It's even survived to this day. I believe this. I believe that there is something significant that happens when we sing together. Something significant that happens when we sing corporately, right? Together. You can see it with soccer clubs like Liverpool or even the Sounders. You can see it with national anthems at the Olympics or other patriotic moments where people are feeling the sense of national pride. And I believe that most importantly, you can see it in the church that follows Jesus. And I actually believe this, that when we sing together in the church, it actually unifies us in a way that soccer clubs could only hope to poorly replicate. See, there's a truth that I really want us to know today, which is this: singing together brings us together. Singing together brings us together. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I have to believe that there's something about the way that when we integrate our bodies and our voices and our minds and our emotions and we're collective, we're holding hands, we have arms around each other, that there's something that happens that unifies us in a way that few other things in this world do. We see this in the history of the people of God, right? Throughout its history, the people of God have sung together for unity, for courage, in times of mourning or lamentation, in times of celebration. In 2 Chronicles 20:21, the Israelites are facing a huge task in front of them, and their army is going on a march to take on another army. And Jehoshaphat is the leader of Israel's army at this time. And he's marching his army into battle. And he makes a really curious tactical decision. He puts the singers at the front of the army, and they're singing and praising the Lord. I think there's something significant about this that from a strategic point seems almost foolish, right? I was a musician. I was a music major in college. We're not your, rough and tumble types that you want at the front of the army, right? You look at our worship leaders today, and I love worship leaders today, but Jehoshaphat's putting the dudes in long tees and skinny jeans in the front of the army, and that's not usually who you call to say, hey, go lead us into battle. I'm not that call, right? I was a music major. We don't fight. But Jehoshaphat does. He puts the musicians and the singers in the front of the army. There's something unifying about that, about leading with that song together. When Joshua is trying to put the city of Jericho under siege, he listens to the Lord and follows what seems, again, on face value as an odd command where he says, march around the city, singing praises to me, playing instruments, and the city will be yours. So Joshua listens, and on the seventh day of doing so, the city walls fall. Jesus in the New Testament had gained some support that the religious leaders of his time did not appreciate, and they were trying to hush the people who were singing praises to Jesus. And Jesus says this, he says, even if you hush the people, even if you're able to hush the people, surely even the rocks will cry out. There's something significant about when we get together and sing. And I actually believe this, that singing together is one of the most unifying things that we can do as people. But I want to acknowledge a truth that's really important, and I've taught on this before, and Brian's taught on this before, and it's this: unity is not uniformity. You get that? Unity is not uniformity. You can be unified and not look exactly the same. And I would argue that true unity does not mean uniformity. That true unity means a diverse group of people who relate to God in diverse ways, who are made differently, coming together to be unified. And again, another disclaimer here is, as important as singing together is, there may be seasons where you show up on a Sunday morning and don't sing, or even as a congregation, we don't sing along with musical worship on Sundays. We walked through a season like that in November of this last year, where we said there are other ways that we can worship with music. So we talked about what does that look like to move, to listen, to respond to God. And so no, worship isn't just singing in a room. It's not even always music. Right? Matthew did a great job in week 1 of our series of laying out everything that worship is. But today we are going to talk about singing together. We're going to talk about this time that we come together and corporately together sing on Sunday mornings, sing in our gatherings. It's a huge part of what we do in our gatherings. There was worship before I got up here and taught, even in this online gathering when we were scattered. And I think it's important that you understand something. We don't do live music on a Sunday morning because we think it's going to bring people through the doors. We don't have a band that leads us in worship together because we go, oh, people need to be entertained, and this is a good way of entertaining people, and then we'll trick them into hearing the message. That's not why we do it. We actually believe that the people of God are called to gather together and sing praises to God together. And that something special happens with us as a body of people when we do that act together. And so today, it's going to look a little bit different than some of the other times that I've gotten up here and taught. A lot of times, you'll notice that the teaching structure at Anchor, we have, something that we really want to communicate. We have kind of 3 points that address it. And today, we're not going to do that. Today, we're going to talk about the range of ways that we can express ourselves in worship in that together environment. And so we're going to kind of go through a whole heap of ideas and ways that you can express yourself in worship. And so if you haven't yet, you can pause this gathering, you can grab something to take notes with, because we're going to go through a list of different ways that we can express ourselves in worship. As always, when we teach, we want to root this in Scripture. This isn't my ideas. This is rooted in Scripture and what we see the Bible tell us about singing together. And there's a book in the Bible called the Book of Psalms. And it's one of the best guides that we have for how to worship. It's a collection of poems and songs, many of which are found in our worship songs that we sing today. There are lines in Psalms that you know in your heart, even if this is your first time at a church. And it's interesting, most scholars would look at the Book of Psalms, this collection of songs, and they would split it into 5 separate sections, each with a distinct theme. Some scholars would even go so far as to say that the 5 sections parallel very well with the first 5 books of the Bible in the Old Testament. Just like that indie band that you love that took time to painstakingly construct their track list on their album to make sure that one flowed well into the next and it each had its own separate spot. The Book of Psalms was intentionally written. It's this collection, yes, and it's from a group of different people, but it was intentionally put together and curated carefully. And so I think it's cool that we get to see that intentionality. As we look at the Book of Psalms, within those 5 sections, there's actually a few different categories of types of psalms or songs or poems that we see. There's praise, right? And praise is pretty self-explanatory. There's wisdom, which are songs that are telling a truth like you'd see in the book of Proverbs, or a wise saying that helps us remember. I think sometimes when we sing together, it helps us remember truths that we need to know on our Monday through Saturday. There's what scholars have called royal psalms, where we celebrate this idea of God as king. We're going to talk more today about the idea of God as king and how that's a little bit of a foreign concept for us in our culture today, but really important nevertheless. There's songs of thanksgiving, right, where we say thank you, where we are grateful and we show our gratitude. And then there's psalms of lament, of sorrow, of sadness. I love that in this book of Psalms, we get to see that range of emotions, from praise and thanksgiving to lament and everything in between, because God says, I care about all of you and all of your feelings. Now, as I've shared before when I teach, I grew up in a Baptist church tradition that was pretty stoic in its worship. You didn't move around, you stood still, especially the men, you stood still and hearty and firm, and maybe you sung loudly. A lot of guys just stood there awkwardly kind of singing. And so again, this, as we talk about expressions of worship, I think some of you, like your awkward meter went up a little bit. You kind of got a little nervous. You go, I don't know if that's me. And so I need you to know, this is coming from someone who feels that very strongly as well. I'm not gonna, if you've been in a gathering with me on Sunday morning, you'll notice I'm not jumping around, I'm not clapping, I'm not running around, I'm not, falling to my knees in the auditorium. Because a lot of that feels uncomfortable to me still. But can I tell you something? There are times when I am so moved to move myself, to be expressive in worship, to get out of my comfort zone and to move myself in a way that feels foreign to the church tradition that I grew up in. And when I do that, when I step out of my comfort zone, I often find that I feel closer to God than I ever have in a Sunday gathering. And so if you also have some of those kind of roadblocks set up, if you have some of those awkward feelings set up, I just want to encourage you, can you hang with me? Can you hang with me as someone who grew up in a church that was very stoic, that was very vanilla, that was very straight-laced, and who grew up in a household that way and has learned what does it look like to actually be expressive in worship? Can you come with me as we journey through this together? Just give me the next 20 minutes and we can get through this journey together. And so again, knowing that there's some of you that are like me, that go, man, I don't know if I can move around. I'm not going to be dancing in the auditorium anytime soon, let alone my house where I'm watching this. We're going to start somewhere easy for us. We're actually going to start in Psalm 46:10. It says this. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Be still." Some of you just sat out a sigh of relief. You're like, I'm good. I am good at being still during worship. I don't even sing. I'm so good at being still. But I think that there is an important aspect of being still as an expression of worship. We live in a culture that, especially pre-COVID, was at a breakneck pace, where it was common for between commuting and working hours to be working 60 to 70 hours a week. Where then when you came home, you were shuttling kids from each sports practice to sports practice to sports practice, doing dinner in the car. Where when you're going in your car to your commute, or even at home, you're listening to podcasts, you're listening to music, there's always noise going in the back of your head. And maybe when you get at home, you're working on those house projects. I just think one of the things that I learned in the last 18 months through this global pandemic we've had is that sometimes God is asking us to just sit and be still. That sometimes God is saying, will you just sit and be still and listen to me? I think some of you, your life is going at a pace that's in the red. And Sunday mornings might be a time where God's asking you to say, come and be still. I think there's something interesting about this. I think a lot of times when we think of be still, we think of in our private quiet times, in our moments of solitude. And actually, if you look at the beginning of Psalm 46, it says who this song is for, and it says it's for the director of music. That's interesting there, right? Because the music director, and that's Pete, right? It's not saying, hey, Pete, this is for your quiet time. It's saying, hey, Pete, this direction is for the congregation, for the group of people following Jesus. This isn't meant for your quiet time. It's meant for, say, like, there might be a Sunday morning where you come in and you might be sitting, you might be standing. You just need to be still in the presence of God. Something else that's interesting, I love the end of verse 10. It says this. After he says, be still, he says, I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. I love this idea that God puts in here where he says, I'm going to be exalted and it's not dependent on your actions. I think a lot of times we feel the need to manufacture for God, and God says this, he says, I just need you to be still and be present with me, and I will still be exalted even in the stillness. Something else that we see is in Psalm 95, verse 6. It says this, come, let us bow down and worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. Bowing. When was the last time that you bowed? I honestly can't remember. I think the last time that I physically bowed was probably 7 years ago, and I went on a trip to work and partner with some churches in Asia. And so as a part of the cultural norms there was a formal greeting that involved a bow. But in our 21st century American context, we don't bow. It feels weird. It feels vulnerable. And I think that might be the point. Kneeling in a gathering is really, it's an acceptable posture. Bowing down in a gathering in the space where people are praising God is acceptable. And I think God asks us of that to do sometimes. Sometimes you'll see one of our vocalists on stage do that, where they are so overcome that they kneel down as they sing and praise God. I think sometimes we feel so overwhelmed by our inadequacy, or we feel so overwhelmed by the greatness and the mercy and the graciousness of God that we have no other response but to bow down, to honor God the King. This King who made everything in the universe, this vast universe that we've only started to explore as a people, and still knows the number of hairs on your head. It's interesting, we have no cultural parallel where we bow, right? There are no kings in our everyday life. We elect the leaders of our country, right? They're not kings who are appointed over us. We elect them. There's agency in that. And look, no voting system is perfect, but there still is agency for us as citizens to elect our officials. And with a king, there isn't that. With a king, with God, we didn't get to play any part in that. There's no agency. There's nothing. We're taking this different posture. We say, God, we've done nothing to deserve your goodness, nothing to deserve your grace. We're going to bow in front of you in awe of who you are. So we have being still. We have bowing or kneeling. I think sometimes, though, we come in on a Sunday morning, and I know this has happened to me many times. It's probably happened to you many times. We come in on a Sunday morning and things aren't going well. Something happened in our life, something hard, something difficult. And so we come in a posture of seeking comfort. Psalm 42 is one of the most well-known psalms, and it's filled with these types of longings for comfort. It often says this, my soul is downcast. I don't know what the last year and a half has been like for you individually, but I bet your soul's been downcast, at least in parts of it. I was talking to a good friend of mine the other day, and he said this. He goes, I think last year and a half has been a really bad day. We don't even know the effects of it, but it's felt like for a year and a half, we've just had one bad day after another after another. There's been times in this season, recent times in this season, where my soul has been downcast. I just want to say this. It's okay to seek comfort when you come in on a Sunday morning. We say this, that we're a community of imperfect people following Jesus. And on a Sunday morning, we want to make it abundantly clear that there are no perfect people in the room. Jesus hasn't come back. And it's okay to come in broken. It's okay to come in visibly broken, to feel like your brokenness, your downcastness is on display. That's okay. I think that there's a time in worship where we get to seek comfort. But if that's you, can I encourage you to do something that I have found to be helpful as well? When we look at Psalm 42 and we look in the midst of this grief, this sadness, this sorrow that the author is experiencing, he says this, put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. I think when we come in a posture of seeking comfort, it can heal us. And I think one of the better ways that it can heal us is when we keep our eyes and remember that God is still God. And even in the most downcast times, even the hardest of times, we worship him because we can still see his goodness in that times. I think there are times for us to corporately grieve together. A funeral, a celebration of life, a gathering to remember someone that has left us. And just the other week, a group of students that I know gathered on a Wednesday night, which was their normal youth time, and they gathered, and youth looked a little different that night. They gathered to remember the life of someone who had been taken from this world far too soon. But then many of those students showed up again on Sunday. And on Sunday, they sang songs of praise and worship to God. That even in the midst of this hardship, even in the midst of this absolute tragedy, said, God, I love you and I know you are still good and I can see your goodness. And I know that this person who's gone far too soon is with you today, and I praise you for that they are with you. I think it's important to know that when we come in and seek comfort, to keep our eyes and our hearts focused on the idea that God is still good and that there is healing that only he can bring. I think out of that healing and out of that goodness that we see comes this idea of gratitude. Psalm 40 talks about gratitude. It says this, he lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. God has rescued me from so many things, so many ways that my life could have gone differently, so many ways that I look and say, God, I can't believe that this is where I'm at. I can't believe how good you are to me, God. Yes, life is hard, but at the end of the day, I still look and go, man, God has rescued me from so many things, including and especially myself. And there's gratitude that comes with that. I just know this, it's amazing how much a difference showing gratitude can make. I have 3 kids. They're 5, 3, and 7 months old. And for parents out there as well, I think you know this. When your kids show gratitude, it makes a huge difference in your attitude and your heart as a parent. When my kids are whiny and demanding that we bring different things to them at meals because they're 3 and 5, and of course they need 500 different things at mealtime, or they think they do, or they're whiny about the fact that they're they ripped their clothes and somehow it's our fault, even though we provided those clothes, right? It hurts my heart and it makes me have a bad attitude as a parent. Well, my kids are grateful when they say thank you for the small things and the big things. When they say, Dad, we're so glad that you're our dad. Dad, thanks for these bunk beds that you got me 2 months ago. Like, they're one of my favorite things. Like, it just makes my heart happy. I don't like when people show gratitude and there's a recipient of gratitude, like, it just makes my day. And here's the thing, God doesn't need us to give him gratitude to change his mood because he's God and his mood is good and perfect always. But I just know this, like, there's something special that happens when we show gratitude. I think sometimes when we come in on a Sunday morning in worship, we need to have a posture of gratitude. And out of that posture of gratitude, out of that expression of gratitude, I believe comes celebration. If you were here last week in person at Central or even online, you heard Pastor Winston talk about this. How he has seen men get so excited about a basketball game. He has seen men jump up and down and run around and take off their shirts and flip cars for who knows why reasons because of a basketball team. I've seen some of the same men that I grew up with that would not sing in church be arm around each other, singing joyously at a Sounders game. I think there's something interesting. Whereas it feels culturally acceptable to get excited about sports, and it doesn't feel culturally acceptable to be excited or celebratory about worship. I think sometimes we let our culture's view of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable drive our behavior. I've seen so many people that stand there awkwardly in a worship gathering on a Sunday morning, make absolute fools of themselves for a sports team or a TikTok trend or something like that. And I go, I wonder what's driving that. I think sometimes it is the cultural perception of what we can and can't do. I just think this, like, God has freed us from so many things. God has done so much good for us. God has radically transformed my life, your life probably, in so many lives, and that is worth celebrating. Psalm 107 talks about this. It talks about the freedom that God has given every single person who has said yes to him. I just think this, what would our worship gatherings look like if we were more okay tapping into those feelings in a gathering? If we were more okay, and again, I'm one of the first offenders to do this. If we were more okay pushing through our awkwardness, pushing through the signals in our brain that says, no, I'm going to be looked at weird. I'm going to be looked at differently. People are going to judge me. If we push through that and said, no, God has given us freedom and that demands celebration because it's the best freedom we've ever seen. Look, I love sports. I watch sports a lot. I talk about sports a lot. I have cried as a result of sports games. And I just think that pales in comparison to the things that God has done for me and done for you and offered to everyone. I just think this, can we be people who are willing to push through that awkwardness, who are willing to lean out of our comfort zone and celebrate God who deserves celebration more than anything else that we've ever encountered? So tapping into those feelings, it might look like a couple of things. One of those is this, it's what we call clapping and shouting. Psalm 47:1 says this, clap your hands, all you nations, shout to God with cries of joy. Clapping, shouting, they're the things that we naturally do when we're excited, right? We applaud for almost everything, but it's so hard to get people to clap in a worship song. There are people who shout at sports games, at things, at when you're playing pickup with your friends. And I just think this, sometimes God says, I want your whole body into this. I don't want just your voice. I want the depth of the voice, your range of your voice. I want your vocals. I want you to shout. I want you to clap. I want you to move. I want you to express with your whole body the joy that you are feeling because of the freedom that only I can give to you. I just think this, there's something special that happens when you're in a crowd that celebrates together. I remember I've been in an NFL stadium for a playoff game that the home team won. And I remember the noise of the crowd when the touchdown was scored with 3 seconds left on the clock and they knew that they had won. And again, it's a goosebumps moment, right? A goosebumps moment when you hear this entire crowd come together and yell and clap and raise their voices in a celebration together. And I just think this, what would our worship gatherings look like if we celebrated together in the same way? What would our worship gatherings look like if we collectively together celebrated the freedom over sin and the freedom from eternal death that God has given every single one of us? I told you we were going to kind of go on a spectrum here of different expressions of worship, and now we're going to be at the fully end of the spectrum of things that John's least comfortable with. And again, I'm just going to ask you, stay with me on this. Psalm 149:3 says this: "Let them praise his name with dancing and make music to him with timbrel and harp." I'm good with all the words in that verse except for dancing. I am not a dancer. I do not have rhythm. It was really hard for me to learn that when I played jazz. I got through it as a musician, but I have no natural rhythm in my body. But I see this command from God. I see this thing where God says, praise my name with dancing. I am so self-conscious about myself. I am so self-conscious about dancing. I remember in high school, we had these dances, right? You had 2 a year, whether, it was Tolo or formal or fall fling or spring fling or whatever it was. There was always 2 dances a year. And then senior year, you had prom. I remember going to dances in 9th and 10th and 11th grade because that's what you did. It was a social thing. And like many of you, especially men out there, I was the awkward dude standing on the side. I didn't want to dance. I felt so self-conscious about what I would look like, what people would think of me, what that would look like. And can I tell you, when you go to a school dance and you just stand awkwardly on the side for 2 hours and try to make conversation, it's not a fun experience. And I remember thinking, dancing sucks. It's not fun. I'm not having fun. Completely forgetting the fact that, I wasn't dancing. And I remember I would take these girls to the dance with me because, again, that's what you do. And I'd be like, man, I don't know why they had such a bad time. And it's because I stood on the side awkwardly. Of course they had a bad time. And then I remember senior prom was different. Senior prom, I went with a really good friend of mine. And something just kind of flipped in my head where I'm like, no, it's senior prom. I don't want to miss this opportunity. And I'm going to decide to not care about how I look. I'm going to decide to just go in and dance however goofy it is. And here's the fun thing. She was a goofy dancer too. It was great. And that was one of the best nights of my life in high school that I had with friends because I got over myself. Because I got over my inhibitions. I stopped caring about what other people would think about me and said, no, I'm just going to be present. I just think sometimes God's calling us to be present in a way that's way out of our comfort zone. I don't know about you, but I have had moments in a worship gathering where I have felt like I'm supposed to move around and dance a little, and I have shut that down. I don't think that's what God wants for me. I don't think it's what God wants for you. I think God says this. He said that there's a whole range of expressions that I have given to you as a human, and I want you to use all of those expressions when you worship me. I think that gets to an interesting point as we wrap up this teaching, which is this. Why do we worship? Do we worship because God, the Creator, is this vengeful, angry God who demands our actions, demands our behavior? No, that's not why we worship. We worship because I believe it's our only response to the goodness of God. That we have a God who made the entire universe as vast as it is, and like I said before, knows every hair on our heads. That we have a God who is perfect and good and gracious and somehow fully merciful and fully just in ways that we can never wrap our heads around on this side of eternity. And he loves me and he loves you. He loves every single person. He loves us so much that he looks at us and he looks at our mistakes. He looks at our brokenness. He looks at the ways that we reject him every single day, sometimes every hour. And he says, I still love you. And I love you so much that I'm going to send my son, Jesus. And Jesus is going to walk among you for 30 plus years, never messing up, never making a mistake, and showing you the goodness of me right there on earth. And guess what? He's going to die for you. He's going to die for you, and 3 days later, he's going to rise again from the dead. And because of that, you're going to be able to have a relationship with me for eternity. The Bible is really clear. God's really clear. There is nothing that we have done or could ever do to merit or earn or deserve that gift of salvation, of freedom that God gives us. And so when I look at worship, when I look at the expressions ranging from being still to dancing, and I look and say, of course I should give my whole body to this. Of course I should give all of my expressions to this. Of course I should push past my insecurities. I should get over myself, get over my inhibitions and say, God, here I am. I want to give you all of me because you have given me all of you. And that there's no other response that I have but worship to an all-powerful God who chooses to love me and to die for me to be in relationship with me. So as you're watching this today, I think there's probably a couple takeaways. One is this. You're here today, and that's news for you. That the God who made everything is the same God who says, I know you, and I love you, and I am for you. Maybe today is the day where you finally say yes to that. You say yes to not doing it on your own. You say yes to doing it the way that Jesus has, by saying, believe in me, believe in what I did, and that freedom is yours as well. Maybe you're here and you're like me, though, and you've heard these expressions, and God is actually asking you to choose one of those to put into practice, to choose one of those the next time you're in a worship environment, whether it's in your home with your family, or whether you go back in person to a gathering, and God's saying, will you choose one of these? Will you listen to the promptings I put on your heart? I just think this, if we do that, if we listen well and are able to push past our insecurities, to push past our inhibitions, we're going to see God move in a way in our life and the lives of those around us that we have never seen